Yeah,
Okay.
just a little bit more on the side. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, just kind of slide that back. Yeah, you'll be perfect.
On camera, you want your hair to look good.
Absolutely.
It's important.
And really, I got to tell you, people, you really wouldn't understand how long it takes to make that hair look.
It's important, though.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyway, real quick, just to welcome you guys back alongside John Galloway. I'm merely Christopher Harrison, and this is Introduction to ASP.NET MVC.
And thank you for spending the day with us. We are just about to wrap up. So we've worked through, looking at the basics.
Yep.
We have looked at model views controllers. We've looked at Visual Studio tooling. And then these are a few additional things. We just looked at Bootstrap to make your views look good. And then one obvious thing, it's always important to secure your application.
Absolutely.
So we're going to be talking about ways you can authenticate your users, control your security, and that kind of stuff. Here's kind of an overview of what we'll be looking at. So ASP.NET Identity, individual user accounts, which is kind of the general, anything you're storing in a database is going to be your individual user accounts generally. Identity extensibility, and federated identity as well. So here's kind of a look at where we've been. We kind of started off, if we're looking at where, how far we've come. So we started off in ASP.NET 1.1, where your options were write it yourself. Right?
Well, yeah. I mean, at the very least, we did get the redirect from login.
Well, that's true.
I mean, it was something. It was better than what it was in ASP.
Well, I'm actually talking about ASP.NET Web Forms 1.1.
Right. Yeah. We at least got the redirect from login. Yeah, which was better than what we had.
Right.
In
but
ASP.
There was no kind of membership system. Right?
No. We at least had a foundation, but it was a lot of write yourself.
Yep. And then ASP.NET 2.0 was a big release, and included in there, membership and all kinds of this whole provider system, and that came out in 2005, and really support. It worked pretty well for a long time, but there are a few cracks in the foundation. One is that it really kind of assumed you've got users with usernames and passwords. They had no concept of social login with Twitter, which hadn't been invented yet, Facebook, which not as many people were using. There just wasn't a thing of social login back then. So then with ASP.NET MVC4, we got simple membership. And simple membership was indeed simple, and it did support things like social login. But it wasn't very extensible, it wasn't unit testable, it was too simple.
Yeah,
right?
Yep.
And so now it's time to kind of go beyond that, and we really made a lot of effort with this new release to do one ASP.NET identity system.
Yep.
And this is a system which is designed to, solve kind of all the problems. So we've got, it still needs to support username, password, login. It also needs to be, needs to be testable, it needs to be extensible. Anywhere you may want to store your data in Oracle or get it from a web service or call into CRM system or whatever, look it up in a binary file. We don't care. We need to work with what you're doing. And also we want it to work, it's a one ASP.NET identity, meaning it'll work with web forms, web API, SignalR, basically all across the ASP.NET world. Okay?
Right. Yep.
So here is a huge list of bullet points, and I'm just going to point out some top ones here. So, we've got this idea of, let's go with a highlighter, because you were rocking the highlighter earlier. So, again, this one identity system, right, this is going to work
always
better.
Much easier than using the mouse.
Drawing, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to have to color this in because it's bothering me. Okay, so one identity system, this works everywhere. Easy to plug in profile data. If you ever tried to plug in profile data to the membership providers, you wish you hadn't. It was hard work. and it stored all the information inside these kind of blobs in the database, and it was really tricky to get at them. Persistence control, meaning you can store the data wherever you want. Unit tests, like I said, it works with both roles and claims. So we can't dig into this today, but there's some great information out there if you go to asp.net/identity. And the idea is a role is a Boolean. It just says yes or no. Is this user an admin? Yes or no. A claim it can carry rich information. So you can say user role, right? Or you could say, my claim might be email addresses, and it could have a list of email addresses.
Right.
Or it could say, allowed, membership levels or whatever. So claims can carry rich information. It's not just flip on and off. Because claims can carry rich information, they're actually a superset of roles. So anything that you could put in a role can be a claim as well. Social login providers, of course, we talked about, works with Active Directory. Owen and NuGet, we're not really going to talk about, but we got them. Okay, so there's that. Here's some scenarios, and I'm going to talk through these in a second. We're really going to focus on individual user accounts in this session. And the way I keep them straight in my head is, if it's going in your database, it's probably an individual user account.
Very simple.
Right.
Yep.
So these are things like username, password, or social identities. Log in with Twitter. Well, you're still storing that information, that ability to log in and who that user is in your database. So somebody authenticates to your system with Twitter. Twitter passes me a token. I store that token. I store whatever information you and Twitter have authorized to give me. I store some of that, and then that's what I've got. But it's going in my database. All these other things on the list, Active Directory, ADFS, and Azure Active Directory, those are all Active Directory, right? And those are being stored elsewhere, either cloud-based or on-premises. And so those are also handled, but it's separate out of this individual user accounts. Those things on this table go on this change authentication. So when I create a new, yes, I do want to discard. I don't know if I said keep or discard. But so if I create a new application, I have the option here. So I'm creating a new ASP.NET. Remember at the beginning of the day, we brought this form up and we said, here's what I can create. So for any of these, I can say I would like to create, web forms with MVC and web API, whatever it is. And then I say change authentication. So if I say individual user accounts, there's nothing to configure here.
Right.
If I say no authentication, surprisingly, there's nothing to configure.
Weird.
Organizational. So these are things where I can store cloud using single organization or on premises, and so this is where I can fill out, exactly how I'm storing that. And then Windows Auth. This is an intranet app. Everything's just handled IIS and Windows authentication. Yep. Right.
And so typically, you're going to find yourself using that individual user accounts.
Individual user account is the default, and it's what you're normally going to use, unless you're working in an enterprise situation generally. Okay, so there we go with that. And so I've just shown you, these are those same dialogue things. I've just got them in the slides here for people downloading the slides.
Right.
Terminology. So we've got, identity and credentials. Credentials kind of map to who you are. Actually, I'm going to blaze through these pretty quick. I just want to point out a few. We mentioned roles and claims. Again, that's important to realize is that roles have been around since that ASP 2.0 system, right? Claims have been supported since ASP.NET 4.5, and they're supported throughout the system, but it wasn't really easy to take advantage of.
Right.
.NET supported them down to the basic levels, but it wasn't really supported, so that's now there.
And so claims give you the ability to kind of move beyond just a basic role, basic group membership. So it would give you the ability to highlight, people from this area or execute other code to be able to determine whether or not we want you to be able to perform a particular operation.
Right. Another thing that's great about claims is they work well with things like social authentication.
Right.
So for instance, a sample claim might be when I log in with Facebook, Facebook can say, well, this user's authenticated claim indicates their birthday is whatever day, or their hometown is this, or their friends, they have this many friends, or whatever it is.
Right.
LinkedIn may verify that I am an expert in all kinds of crazy things, and so those would be my claims that LinkedIn is going to be passing down.
Right.
Right. So in addition to roles, which I would define claims are something that can work across multiple parties, two-factor auth is really cool. This is the idea that I log in with a site, and then there's a second factor.
Right.
So the idea is I may log into the site, and it may send me an SMS with a code, and I need to type in that code. I actually use this like on my podcast site.
Right.
And it just gives you that added security. Even if somebody steals my password, I'm safe, it's a lot more difficult because now they need to also get this second factor. And in most cases, the second factor is updated every 6 minutes or so.
Exactly.
So very, very difficult to break past that. This is supported with an update to ASP.NET Identity. Great. One other thing to point out is the tricky distinction between authentication and authorization, right? So authentication only says who you are.
Right.
I'm authenticated as John. What are my rights? No rights. Okay, so I'm not authorized, but I'm authenticated, right? So, or, maybe I am, because you're Christopher, once we authenticate you as Christopher, you are super admin of all time user, and so now you have all the rights in the world. Okay, so there's that important distinction. There's authentication, who you are, and then authorization, what you're authorized to do. So you'll see, and it's unfortunate, both start with the same sound, auth, and so people just talk about auth. Well, which auth? Because there's a very important difference between those. All right, individual user accounts. I'm not going to read all these because I'm feeling tired, but the basic ideas here. ASP.NET Identity is set up to work across all of these different systems. So we're talking today about MVC, but if you're using Web API, SignalR, Web Forms, in the same application, it's going to work across all of them. Skipping past that, let me see. Identity 2.0, so ASP.NET Identity 1 shipped with the initial release. ASP.NET Identity 2.0 came out very soon after that and includes a lot of other things. So for instance, we talked about two-factor auth. Account lockout is another very important thing, and that is if I log in incorrectly too many times, my account's locked for a period of time. This prevents brute force attacks. Other things like account confirmation, meaning I log in, I enter my email address, it sends me an email saying, you have logged in, you've created an account, click this link to verify you are who you said you are.
So if I can just kind of sum up those first couple of bullet points there, this is basically just everything that we've been looking for as developers. Yes. That I just want an easy way to handle email confirmation. I want an easy way to handle two-factor authentication. So everything that's been requested here, and it's just that much simpler.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the idea is, really, and the first release of ASP.NET Identity didn't have these features, obviously. They're in 2.0, but it built this this nice foundation that it's easy to layer stuff on top of. I think that's key, that very soon after the first release of ASP.NET Identity, boom, here's the second. We've actually got a 2.1 alpha out already earlier this month.
Right.
Who knows, while I've been talking, it may have shipped and we're on to 2.2 or 3. But the point is that they're shipping these updates very rapidly that are building on top of this foundation. Great. All right, so I want to just point out some of the things, and I forget if I have, no, okay. So I'm just going to show you in this, again, discard. Let's take a look at my, get rid of that guy, get rid of this. Get rid of that, boom. We are back to our application we've been looking at for a while. I want to point out the way that login has been happening from the beginning. So we have not actually, you created authentication. Did you create a user and log in?
No.
We just showed that, right?
Just showed it.
But the point was, from the very beginning, file new project, we're able to authenticate and authorize things in this controller. And I'm forgetting here, if I search for authorize, I'm curious. I think we have that maybe in the reviews controller. There it is.
Yep.
This is, well, it's in the account controller there. That was it.
Oh, no, it was in...
So it was commented out, right?
I think it was the album one, and yeah, either commented it out or I deleted it, but it was there at one point. Yeah.
So the idea here is I can go in and I can say, for the entire controller...
Yeah, I think I deleted it. It was on the create, but in any event.
Sure. Okay, so let's drop that back in. There it is. Authorize. Oh, it was because you had the parentheses after, of course. Okay, so now create. So now if I run this, and I'm actually going to, we can go through and look at what would be required in order to log in there. So I'm going to set a breakpoint in a controller that's been here the whole time that we have not looked at, and that is this login controller. So if I go to inside the account controller, excuse me, not login, there is this register and login, right? And so I can say, here is my login, and right. So if I run this application and I try to go to create an album, it's going to require me to log in. And that redirection has actually happened behind the scenes for us. So if I go to, I think, what was it, album create? Albums create. So because of this authorize.
Waiting. We need that musical interlude again.
This store is not going to sell a lot of albums.
No.
Okay.
Boy, this looks like it's going to bomb.
It does not look good. Normally, computers don't take this long to do good things, only bad things.
Yeah, exactly.
While it's doing that, let's look at some code, because that's not going to catch on fire just looking. Oh, there.
You had a breakpoint.
So apparently, when you set a breakpoint,
yeah.
I'm not sure if you were aware of this, Christopher. If you set a breakpoint, it will actually stop the execution of your code. Yeah,
really?
That's a more advanced topic.
That's got to be a new feature.
So I meant to do that.
Punchy. So when you set a breakpoint, it stops your code. Weird.
Right.
Okay.
So here's what happened: is I tried to browse to something, because my albums controller had authorize on it. That sent me over to the account controller. This redirection is actually happening inside of the login system. So if we look at, I want to show you where that's happening. If I go to startup.config, so this is in the root of the application. So here, boom, startup.config. There we go. And startup.config has like just a few lines of code, and it calls configure auth. So let's go find, this is like, Mario being told our princess is in another castle.
Yes.
Great. So time to go over to startup.auth.cs. And what this is doing is it's configuring all the stuff for the login. And one of the things it configured here was this use cookie authentication. And it's saying, here's my authentication, my basic login stuff. And it's going to handle the redirection over to account/login. Okay?
Yep.
So if we look at my URL, well, it's actually redirected over there, but this is, if you've been paying attention here, the standard routing is going to say, I'm going to look at the account controller, the login action.
Right.
So let's take a look over there. We're in the account controller, we're in the login action. All right? So here, this is telling us this is a return URL, this is where we're going to go once you've logged in, and boom, time to log in. Okay. Now I could go through and create an account, and when I do that, it's automatically going to save it off.
Right.
Okay.
One little thing that's worth highlighting just briefly is the default implementation is looking for a relatively complex password that is looking for characters, numbers, and a special character, so something like an @ an exclamation point, or the like. So just something to keep in mind, because frequently questions do come up about, hey, why is this not letting me create this? What's wrong with my password? That's what's wrong, is that you just need either a number or something like an @.
Right. So really what I've shown here is the basics of the moving parts of requiring authentication, and then where that is happening, and that's in that account controller.
Yep.
So if you want to create a new user with a username and password, it's already kind of set up for you. If you decide to modify that, be careful. because obviously if you're changing how people are logging into your site, that's where security issues happen. I've talked to people, I'll be like, oh, I'm not going to bother with this account controller. There's a lot of code in there. Well, that code actually does some important stuff, right? It
does.
And, things like, well, getting a confirmation email, let's make that allowed anonymous, but other things, we're going to validate anti-forgery tokens. If you don't know what every line of code in here does,
that's okay.
Well, that's okay, but don't throw it out and write your own. If you don't understand what this is doing, it's like you must be as tall as this sign to attack the city. Okay, so that's that kind of basic login stuff. Now I want to show off external providers. So
yes.
So I could have gone in and actually, I'm being honest here. I did not want to create a new username and a new password.
Yep.
Because I do that 5 times a day and I hate it.
And
It's terrible.
I got to be honest. Every time I go to a site, and I personally use a password manager, which does still simplify those things. But even then, having to create yet another account, having to set up yet another password, having to log in yet again to another site. It just gets tedious after a while. And if you create that as the bar, if you're wanting me to buy something from you, and I always like to kind of mention that when you're creating applications, when you get right down to it, what are you trying to do? You're trying to make money. You're trying to get somebody to buy something from you, either directly that you're selling them actual products, or B, your services, and you're just trying to talk about how great your services are. Well, if you say, well, you have to create another account for me to now give you my money, depending on what it is that you're trying to offer me, I very well may look at that and just go, you know what, on second thought, it's just not worth it.
Yep.
And just move on.
So that's exactly that. If we cut back to my slides here, this is, why force somebody to create another identity?
Exactly.
They don't want it. And
No.
in a lot of cases, I don't need it either. I don't need it for two reasons. One, all I need to be able to do is associate a login with a person.
Right.
And two, I don't want the responsibility of safeguarding their information, their password, maybe their credit card, whatever. I want to store as little information as possible.
Exactly. The easiest data to secure is data that you don't store.
Right.
If I don't have it, I don't have to worry about it.
Yep.
Yeah,
Let's
let somebody
outsource
else.
that.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so there is support in ASP.NET Identity for external providers. We've got support for Facebook, Google, Microsoft, and Twitter, and then you can plug it in. You can plug in other ones. You can also store additional user information. So we can say this user logged in using Twitter, but we're going to store their whatever other information they want to give us.
Yep.
Right? So, or they logged in with their Microsoft account, but here is their blog, and here's their Twitter handle, and here's their whatever it is.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's one of those kind of cool little things that you implement that and you get additional information about the user. You get a little bit of demographic info.
Yep. One other cool little thing I want to point out is that a single user can have multiple social identities. And this is, when I go to a site and it says, what do you want to log in with? Twitter, Google, Facebook, Microsoft. And I forget what I used to create that account. And it's nice that I can have multiple things all log in as the same. So if I log in with Twitter, if I created my account with Twitter, later I associate it with Google, later I associate it with Microsoft account, whatever, next time I log in, I'm all the same person, and it handles that.
Yep.
Cool. So let's look at social providers. Now, what I am doing here is, as I often do, taking advantage of Rick Anderson's work. Rick Anderson writes some really great stuff for the ASP.NET site. And so I highly, highly, highly recommend this tutorial.
Yeah.
So if you go into ASP.NET MVC 5 and look in the tutorials list, this is there.
Yeah, a lot of people have been asking different questions about handling things like migration from membership into identity, asking questions about how do you then, go get the tokens, how do you incorporate all of that, should something happen, how do you go in and invalidate those tokens, kind of all of that general management, all of that going back to the blog post, if we want to throw that back up on the screen, or you're probably 12 screens away from something
Well, I was
else.
going to show this migrations information.
Oh, okay.
This is also good.
There you go. Yeah, there's the migrations information, has all that information. So everything that you're looking for on identity, the ASP.NET people have done a great job of putting all of that together.
So where you want to go is ASP.NET. Whoa, I did it again.
Yeah,
I made it through almost the whole day.
You did.
Okay, so ASP.NET/identity.
Yep.
And from there, it's going to have everything you need to know, including links to tons of code samples.
Right.
So it'll take you into a lot of depth. So this is information about how to migrate from SQL membership, universal providers. It's really good stuff, and it really kind of walks you through all that.
Yeah.
So this example here looks at logging in with social providers. So I've set that up in our application. I want to point out the important things of what I did. First, a lot of these providers are going to require SSL, just like Christopher requires SSL, right? I mean, you pointed out before how important it is, and people pointed this out in the chat. And a really important thing about SSL is not, that it's all about encryption. It's that it tells me who I'm talking to, and it establishes that link that nobody else is then I'm talking to the person I think I'm talking to.
Right. Since we're talking about security, and now I'm going to hijack for 2 minutes
please.
here. Number one is it is about making sure that, yes, this is the organization I think I'm sending that information to. So before you ask somebody for sensitive data, make sure that you've got that page with SSL. So that way they know that they are sending that data to you. That one of my biggest peeves is going to a website that's asking me for a username and a password, and that page isn't encrypted with SSL. Yes, I know when I type in my username and password and I click the button, now it's going to encrypt the page. But how do I know that the page that I'm looking at that's asking me the question is in fact the right site? And then the second big one is, remember with SSL that it's not just the data that's on the page, but it's also that cookie, that token as well. And I can't remember the name of the little attack script that became popular about like 3 years ago now, I think it was, that would allow somebody to hijack your Facebook session. I mean, I really don't care if you see what my Facebook wall is. I mean, all you're going to see is the occasional political post and then just a whole bunch of stuff about running and cooking and things like that. It's really not all that interesting. But all of that being said, I don't necessarily want somebody taking over my session. And that's the real problem there. And that's the other big thing that SSL does, is it will encrypt that token that is being used to prove that you are who you said you are, and preventing somebody else from capturing that, from taking that over. So again, if you are going to be doing anything at all that's going to be behind an authentication wall, you want SSL. And then again, as we've already mentioned, if you're going to be doing anything with Facebook, Twitter, or almost everybody else, they're going to require that you be using SSL, which is a good thing.
Right. So I want to point out there's a great post on this by Troy Hunt. If you don't know Troy Hunt, he's at troyhunt.com. He writes a lot of great blog posts about security. And he routinely goes through and he'll find, large sites, big, store sites on the internet that are selling, selling things and stuff and storing your information. And they're not doing things like requiring SSL on the login page.
Right. Yep.
And so he goes through in this post and he talks about, this is how SSL is giving you, some trust about who you're talking to.
Yep.
And he also talks about what SSL doesn't do. So a lot of good things from Troy. Let's go back to, if I haven't completely lost my train of thought. Oh, SSL. So what I did in order
Remember Alice? It was a song about Alice.
So what I did was I set up support for SSL in my project. This is a new thing that we've added in Visual Studio 2013, and it's really helpful. So here I went in to my project, and where it says SSL enabled, I said true. And when I said true, then it gave me a pop-up and it said, I am creating a self-signed certificate, and this is only locally on your machine. It's saying, I'm creating a self-signed certificate for you. And so I said, okay, cool, thank you for doing that. So now I have an SSL URL that is different than my external URL, right? So now let's see if this works. And honestly, I'm kind of 50-50 on it, but we'll see what happens here. So that was my standard URL. Now if instead I go to the SSL link, so I say this is 44300, and there's my SSL link. Now the reason I did this again is because in order to redirect to it, that's what Facebook's requiring. So now I've gone over to Facebook and I've created an application on Facebook. And I went in here and I said, on my settings, I can say add a platform, and I said website, and then it gave me this. And I'm just putting in, here's my URL. So that's the required stuff. Again, I'm going through this pretty quickly, and this is all covered in this walkthrough, right? So he talks about, first of all, how to enable SSL, and then here he's talking about Google, and then he talks about Facebook below, right? So here, this is basically what we're doing.
Right.
So one of the things that Facebook does is it gives me an ID and a secret. And this is the standard thing for OAuth. This is saying, here's how you communicate. I've issued you an app ID and a secret.
Yep.
So this is different from OpenID, which has kind of been replaced by OAuth authentication at this point. And OAuth gives you an ID and then says, this is your ID with us and this is your app secret. So now I've plugged these in, and this is hidden. I could click show it to you, but I don't want to. But that is essentially my password to log in with them. Okay. So now I'm going to go in, and in my app, let me see, in my startup.auth.cs, I've scrolled down here, and I've uncommented the code that says use Facebook authentication. I've put in my app ID, and Christopher, check this out. I'm being pretty smart here. That is how I've obfuscated my app secret.
Okay, well, just make sure when you go to check in the source code.
Thank you. I would have forgotten that, so thank you. So by uncommenting that, that's all I had to do. Now, that tutorial walks through all the other things you need to do for Twitter and everybody else.
Yep.
Right? But that's really all that's required. So now I'm going to go and run this. And I'm being completely honest here, I have not tested this. I was scrambling to get this in during the break because I really did want to show this off. And I trust Rick, but if this goes wrong, I will blame it on him.
Rick, are you listening?
Okay, so when I go to login, or excuse me, I can go to register. And register, no, I want to go to login. So here it says use another service to log in.
Yep.
So I'm going to click Facebook. It's redirecting me over to Facebook. And now it's saying, it's giving me some sort of warning, and it's asking if I want to, log in.
Yeah.
And I'm going to say OK, because I trust myself. And then, so now it's doing the redirection, and now it's saying, OK, that's cool. You're authenticated through Facebook. Remember, authentication says you are who you say you are.
Right.
But now I want to give more information about myself. So I can say, my name. And here I'm going to say john.galloway@microsoft.com. Right? I'll click register. And now I've created a user, and that's how I'm able to log into the site. So I didn't have to create another account, right? So I've gone through, and now I could actually, I forget which one it was. It was album create. Let's try that. Albums create. And now, because I'm an authenticated user,
now it's actually coming up with the correct page.
Right?
Yep.
Because, and if we'd specified a role, again, that would be another hurdle for me to jump through. But I'm an authenticated user at this point.
Yep.
So that's actually really cool. I've been able to allow people to log into my site. All they have to do is, use Facebook, and it really is the same sort of steps that you follow with everybody else. Microsoft account, everybody else, you go through and create your site. Now, the one difference is Microsoft account does not like you to just say, my URL is localhost. And it actually is going to want you to create another domain. And for that, I recommend the site localtest.me. So if I go to README, localtest. The brilliance of this site is they've created, you can create anything you want. You could create christopherharrison.localtest.me, and it will map that to localhost.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah.
Neat.
So that solves this entire problem. Then you can go through, you can create whatever you'd like, and then on your machine, when you browse to it, it's going to say redirect to 127.0.0.1, and that's your local host, and we're done.
Okay.
So really, really slick little workaround for that issue. All right, let's get into this. So we've looked at that. Now I want to show one other really cool thing, and this is identity extensibility. And what's great about this is it solves a big problem, and it's also like one line of code. So as somebody giving a demo at the end of the day, that's the kind of demo I want.
Absolutely, yeah, one line of code. Just let me uncomment something.
So I'm going to look specifically at profile, and we'll talk about some of the other extensibility options, but I'm just going to point you to them. So I, again, want to discard my ink annotations now and forever. Okay, so here's how that happens. I'm first going to stop my code from running. I'm going to close that guy out. And identity uses if I go into my models, it's actually created a model for me, and I've got an identity model. And actually, just because I want to,
You might want to just go back into Facebook and
I'll
just
reset
delete
it.
that later.
Yeah, I will. I'm going to delete it now because I don't trust you people.
Wow.
Delete app. Oh, okay, fine. No, I'm deleting
yeah,
it.
delete
I'm
it.
heartless. Oh, come on. Fine. We'll do this later. So the point is, there we go. My identity model stores the information for my user, right? And so this is all the code that's required. So now I can say, I would also like to track additional information about my user. And all I need to do if I want to track, say, for instance, their birthday, is I could say, date, time. Whoops.
Yeah, it's not using system.
Yep. And then I can say, birthday. And now if I also want to track, say, for instance, their Twitter. Right?
Yep.
So that's it. And now I'm able to store that information with the user.
Yep.
That really is all I need to do. And so then storing that additional information, during the login, I can modify my login form in order to do that. I'm just going to show where I would make that change. I'm not actually going to do it.
So while you're bringing that up, it's worth highlighting that really at the end of the day, all that you did was something that we've already learned, which was you went to a model, you added on a couple of properties. We now want to prompt the user for that information. So what would we do with any other model? We would go back to the view and update the view to add that in. And that's exactly what you're doing right here.
Right. And so exactly here in this code where I'm creating an email, I could copy this and I could create a new little form group, and that would say, enter your birthday, and I could use a date picker, and then I could put in Twitter handle, and there we go, right? And all that information is stored with the user information. It's stored using Entity Framework code first. And let's take a look at that data here. So if I go in and I refresh this, here is my here's my table. And that is not what I wanted to do. I want to go to Server Explorer and look at my data connections. Mm-hmm. And I can look at my users and roles, et cetera.
Yep.
So on this, this is how it's defined. So it's going to bring up, here's my design surface, and I'm not sure why that would take a while. So instead, I actually, there is the list, right? If I look at my users, I've created one user. And of course, the password is hashed if I created one. Here's this beautiful thing. There's no password, not even a hash, right?
Yep.
And that is really, really cool. And that's, again, the beauty of having this external login.
Right.
Right? So this is all the information about this user. And if I store additional information, it would go right into that.
Right.
Okay. Now, if I don't want to store that there, that's where I get into the other extensibility things.
Yep.
So that flows over pretty well. So let's talk about that. So if I go and I'm looking at identity, here I can plug in external providers. So, this is something where I could go in and I could say, I would like to store using, I would like to store my data somewhere else. In this example, we're storing in MySQL. And you could store this information kind of wherever you'd like to. One other thing I would like to point out is that there are a lot of great additional samples. And I think the samples we'll find on, I'm not sure if they're listed here. They're definitely listed, let me see, it's off of GitHub. There's a lot of these, and they're actually a separate project that's available. So that's pretty useful there. There's some listed here. They're also in NuGet. So you can go in and you can create a new Visual Studio project, and then you can add in a NuGet package. So I'm actually going to do that super quick. I'll create a new MVC application, and we'll go web form, or actually I think I was supposed to do empty. We'll see how it works.
Something's going to happen.
Something either good or bad will happen.
Exactly, yeah.
And at this point in the day, I'm up for either.
Yeah, we get a little punchy when it gets late.
Okay, so I'm going to say ASP.NET Identity.
Yeah, this has been a big question.
Okay, so let's search for that, and it's not in the installed packages list. Let's go and look for the online. Okay, so these are the big list, and I think samples, I don't see it there.
There is a set of samples, and this is something else that a lot of people have asked about is the ability to go in and maybe, for example, have roles inside of a different database or incorporate other things. And there is a NuGet package that, and you'll notice, Bing is there you go.
Okay, I was close, right?
Yeah, ASP,
Microsoft.ASP.NET.
ASP.net.identity.samples.
Yep. And this includes all kinds of great stuff. So I think I can, let me see if I can add that in. And again, it might not happen because I used the wrong project type. ASP.NET.identity.
Something will happen.
Something will happen. I'm going to try one more time, and I'll just say identity. All right, trust me on this.
It is there.
I would go into the package manager console and install from there, but forget it. There are some great samples, and they will take you through a lot more stuff. Right?
Somebody asked a question, and I think this is a kind of a very interesting one, about using two-factor authentication with third-party. And one of the great parts about third-party authentication is that it's up to the third party to handle that for you. So if you're allowing people to use, say, Twitter or Facebook for authentication, both Twitter and Facebook and Live Account and Google, all four of those, give the user the ability to enable two-factor authentication for themselves. So when you say, yes, I want to use fill-in-the-blank authentication here, it's now up to them. So as far as like requiring, you're not going to have that capability, but the nice part, again, is you then don't have to worry about trying to implement two-factor authentication for your own site. Let somebody else who's already set that up do that for you. So the short answer to the question is, can you say, hey, I want to enable this? No, because it's up to the third party. But most every third party that you're going to use will have two-factor authentication that's going to be set up.
Right. And I highly recommend it. The first time I started using it, I was thinking, oh, you got to be kidding me. But the good thing is most sites will allow maintaining those credentials for a while.
Yeah, that you can put a little check next to, yes, trust this browser.
Or keep me logged in for 30 days.
Exactly.
Like that.
Yep.
And there are things like, if it's using a mobile app, you can print out some kind of recovery codes that you can use on an airplane or whatever,
Right.
I mean, so that's definitely helpful. So here I've installed this, and there's all kinds of things like, role admin controller, and there's extensibility on storage and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and actually, while we're at it, somebody else asked about the ability to create and manage accounts, and all of that comes along with the samples.
Yeah. So say, for instance, here, two-factor auth is built into this. Right?
Yep.
So great stuff. I'm going to keep moving because we want to finish some time. Federated accounts, and really here I'm just going to talk
just kind
quickly.
of highlight this.
The reason we debated not talking about it at all, honestly.
Yep. Again, sitting down at dinner last night, we talked about it.
But we did figure that there are a good amount of people, and we saw this at the poll in the beginning of the day, that are working in enterprise. And this is important stuff. And so federated accounts, what I want you to get out of this is, yes, there is support for it.
Yes.
That's really about it. And I'm going to point you at documentation for it. Exactly. So Active Directory, of course, support using IIS, and then ADFS and Azure Active Directory, support again, by pointing them at the right endpoints. So that's that. What I will do is I'm going to point you again at ASP.NET/identity, and really that is kind of the place to go for all this stuff. So,
yes.
So if you're going to if you want to know more about that kind of enterprise identity stuff, so again, if I go to ASP.NET, right, and so here we have things like migrations and all this stuff, and we also will have configuring enterprise using like for instance Windows Azure Active Directory.
Yep.
video, all that kinds of stuff. On-premises organizational authentication with ADFS. So, tons of information here. Again, here by Rick, keeps busy. And this walks you through how to
Rick
set
actually
that up.
have a full-time job? Just blogging.
Well, this is on the ASP.NET site.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah,
right.
this is what he does. So great information here.
Excellent.
So really, let's talk about kind of what we covered in this lesson. So the main thing is we wanted to talk about what ASP.NET Identity does.
Yep.
We spent almost all of our time talking about individual user accounts. We showed
that's the real meat.
That's most of what you'll be setting up. So we talked about logging in, username, password, and I showed you where that's configured using the account controller. And then we looked at social authentication. We saw that there's a few steps on the Facebook side, but really in the application, I uncommented 3 lines of code, pasted in the stuff, and it just worked, right?
Yeah, that's it. So again, to quote John Galloway, it just
works. Yes.
There you go.
And then we talked about some quick extensibility. So the point is, it's supposed to be as simple to use as simple membership, but you can take it wherever you want.
Right.
You store your data where you want. You can change if instead of username IDs you want to use from ints, you want to go to GUIDs or whatever. That's one of the samples also. You can configure just about everything about that.
Yep.
And then we kind of just touched on federated accounts, and I pointed you at documentation and bowed out.
And away we go. All right, so what do you say we, let's change gears?
Let's change gears, yes.